Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So we survived. What did we survive? We survived Trump's first cabinet meeting.
Oh.
He had his first cabinet meeting yesterday, and it's so strange because I've never remembered this in my entire life where you had a guy standing there and his presence was so overwhelming. This guy, Elon Musk, who's, I don't even know what he's doing over there. I know he heads something called Doge. I don't know what it is.
He was at the cabinet.
He's at the cabinet meeting.
Oh, I didn't see
And not only
it.
is he at the cabinet meeting, like he's standing there in his T-shirt, and the president is praising him, and then is challenging anybody. Oh, Elon's doing such a marvelous job. Anybody here doesn't like Elon? Crickets.
Like, oh my God.
Crickets.
Oh, yeah, of course.
They're all thinking to
Of course.
themselves, what's going on here? What kind of a job did I get myself into? This is a bizarro world, but everything is going swimmingly well. He got the minerals from the Ukraine.
Oh my God.
He's putting a 25% tariff on the EU.
Terrible.
He already owns Canada as the 51st state, even though they lost the hockey game.
Did you see
Greenland's coming.
Greenland
Panama.
Did you
he
see
owns
that
the
he
Panama
called-
Canal. He owns the Panama Canal now.
Last week I read a tweet. I really try to avoid him as much as possible. But yes, last week I saw a tweet, or this week, someone posted a tweet of his where he said, "Thank you to Justin Trudeau, the governor of Canada." He called him.
I saw that.
He called him the governor of Canada.
Yeah, he always refers to
he's
that.
the prime minister of a country.
There's no country.
It's so.
Hey, at least you didn't call him the mayor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But anyway, that whole story and intro that you just made, which you always say you don't want to get political.
No,
I just want to say one thing.
It's not political.
I know you're right, but I just want to say one thing. How do I get into that? I want Trump to bring me into the cabinet meeting, and I stand there and say stuff, and everybody praises me. How do you think I can?
I'll tell you first of all.
How do I get there?
First of all, you have to create about 5 large companies.
Oh.
You have to be worth about $400 billion.
Okay, never
You
mind.
have to have 12 children, of which one of them is named X21047. I think it's a social
Fine.
security number.
Never mind.
Okay? You have to have 5 wives, and that's it. That's the criteria.
So you're saying never.
You're close. You're close on the kid part.
Yeah.
It's,
You're
everything
like
else.
You're like a quarter of the way there on the kids.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The money, I'm not so sure about.
Yeah. I wish.
No, he's an interesting character, isn't he? He's a fascinating character.
Who, Elon Musk?
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
So
Fascinating.
all right. So I'll do a quick cut to another topic, if that's okay.
Excellent. Jay, take it away.
All right, that was not the smoothest transition.
The room.
Okay.
Thank God.
So before we get to the topic for the day, I wanted to share something with you guys and see what your thoughts are on this. I'll go here. All right. So for those of you on YouTube, you'll be able to see this. Can you see? All right, here we go. So this is an article that just came out in the New York Times today, and it's a Pew Research poll that Christianity's decline in the U.S. has halted.
Oh.
And I won't read the whole thing, but basically over the past 5 or 6 years, it's been a precipitous decline in people identifying as Christians. And you can see this chart here by decade and how it's been going down. And then in the 2000 2006 timeframe, it's stopped going down.
Uh-huh.
And it's actually flat for the first time in many years since they've been doing this poll. The other interesting thing here is that so this is a chart that shows the difference between men and women in terms of their religiousness. And you can see it's consistently women are more religious until this group. And you can see the difference between the 90s cohort and the 2000s cohort. The women stayed the same, but the men are the ones who significantly increased in their religious observance in Christianity. And so I just wanted to ask, Rabbi, have you seen a trend amongst younger people in general being interested in getting more involved with religion? Or have you heard about that from other rabbis, or what's your take on this?
I've seen Chabad has for example, a C-Team program that has exploded over this past few years. They have a young professional group that has exploded. So I believe that people for a long time, we were not looking for anything. The 90s came, the 2000s came. I think 2001, the World Trade Center shook us a little bit, thinking that we're not as infallible as we thought that we were. So I believe that there are young people are looking towards more spirituality. I'm not sure how you would break it down into religion versus spirituality versus something else, but definitely people are looking for something more than just the materialistic world fulfilling your needs. I mean, we thought that that would be enough. Dayenu, you have a job, you have a family, you don't need the church, you don't need the shul, you don't need anything. But we found out that it's not true. That there's still a void, and we have to fill this void, especially among young people today. And I think they're looking towards something, and religion is there. So I'm not surprised at this poll.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think also just to add to that, like a lot of in the post-COVID world that we're in, and especially in the Jewish world that was slammed by October 7th, after COVID, I see a lot of young people really looking for community and camaraderie and in real life relationships, because so many people and kids especially were like alone for so long and they forgot how to socialize, and there's not that many opportunities, and if you live in a place like we do, you can't just walk outside and find a place to hang out where there are a lot of young people. And I think religion offers a space to show up and be welcomed in by a community, and I think people are starting more and more to take advantage of that.
I mean, I agree 100% with what Chayle said, and just like a small sample size, I was watching like college football, the playoffs. So generally, after the team wins, a lot of they interview the players. It used to be that a lot of the African Americans would thank God and their God. They would thank Jesus and they would thank God. Would be number one. Now it's turned into everybody. Almost everybody, the white coach, the white quarterback, everybody. The first thing they were saying is, Jesus put me into this position, etc., etc. So that's like a little bit of It gives you a sense of that. Not only in the African American community, but also in the white, Anglo community, they're also reaching out and becoming more Christian.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, why not?
Right.
I mean, what is it? What are they asking you to do? I mean, for Judaism, if you want to become traditional, you have to change your lifestyle. Give up your friends, give up your neighbors, give up your house, give up your money, give up everything to become religious, right? But in Christianity, it seems to be pretty easy. I mean, if you want to join a church or, and just live a good life.
It's interesting because sorry, Jay, I'm not letting you speak today.
It's all right. Go ahead.
I'm just going to keep rolling over and say everything. No, but I learned so much since becoming friends with Christians, right? Like we have like Dan, who does our editing.
Right.
Dan's life, to me from the outside, is so rich because of his faith, and so every part of his life is so enriched by his commitment to God and his commitment to his church and his community. And
but Dan is different.
But I'm just saying that I find that very important for
Dan's
people.
a rabbi.
Yeah,
Now, Dan would be a rabbi.
He would. I
mean, in Judaism, he is so involved and is so dedicated, to his church and to his religion.
I think it's healthy for him.
No, it's great for him. It's absolutely great. But I'm not so sure if the Pew report goes that far to say, people are embracing Christianity to that degree. I mean,
it's just asking about.
Are you willing to be identified as a Christian?
Yeah, it's just about identification. But even that had been trending down.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
But I've been on a. At some point, we need to do an episode or a couple episodes on Jonathan Sachs also, because I've recently been
doing those letters.
I've been reading, listening to a podcast about his books recently, and I just watched a video debate he did with Daniel Dawkins back in
Richard.
I'm sorry, yeah, that's right. It's Daniel Dennett.
Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins.
I get confused between the atheists. But so he was doing a debate with him at some point, I think like the late teens, and it was interesting because one of the things that Richard Dawkins he brings up in the discussion is not just that you not just why doesn't matter, but that it is totally meaningless, and you should never ask the question of why, and that you have no right to ask the question of why. And I just thought, like, what kind of a life is that, to never question about what the purpose of living is, and to go to the point where you say not only should you not ask, but you don't have the right to ask,
because they worship a different type of a church.
Right.
Everybody worships in church.
Yeah.
Some worship a church of Christianity, some worship a synagogue, a mosque, and Richard Dawkins and all of those guys, they worship in their church of whatever atheism. They want to call it, of atheism. And it's not that they even the thing about the question. I mean, you come to a point where you're not allowed to, just like religion says you're not allowed to eat pork. They're saying the same regulations. You're not allowed to question. So this whole idea of atheism, but Jonathan Sacks is just.
I know.
I mean, is incredible.
I told you my father
I'm reading the book now. The Screw Tales.
The Screw Tape Letters.
Oh my gosh,
that's what we're gonna read for our book club.
Oh my goodness gracious! I mean, it's amazing. I mean,
good.
the right. I mean,
don't talk about it yet.
No, I'm not saying what it is. It is, but just the writing. I mean, this guy, what a writer! I mean, imagination.
It's phenomenal.
Can I say one thing about the atheist?
The topic?
And then we're going to get to the topic. I just want to say one thing about the atheist because and it's an admission. Like, I thought as a religious person, when I was exposed to Sam Harris and Hitchens and Dawkins, that we always had to contend with their arguments, right? Like, I would always, when I would talk to somebody who wasn't an Orthodox Jew, I always had like those guys in my head kind of trying to respond to their arguments. And it was actually when I first met Jay, we had a conversation. You probably don't even remember this, but we were talking about religion and faith. And I thought you were like the secular guy who doesn't care. And I was like the Orthodox one. And you totally dismissed them. You were like, who cares what they say? Like, I have no interest in what those atheists say. And I was like, oh, I'm allowed to just not care about their arguments. I didn't realize, like, I'm being honest. Like, I really thought that I had to constantly answer their arguments in order to make my case. And you just like simply dismissed it. You're like, actually, I think their arguments are nonsense. And I have no patience for them.
Jay was taking the approach that's written on the subway wall. God is dead, sign Nietzsche. Underneath, Nietzsche is dead, sign God.
Right.
I mean,
right.
And it's not even like I came to that just because I don't want to believe them. I've listened and read to a lot of their stuff, and I just find it incredibly uncompelling.
Right.
I just think it's very superficial gobbledygook.
Well, there is, I mean, not to belabor this issue.
Yes,
now we're talking about this. I remember giving a class years ago on the challenge of Spinoza.
Right.
When Spinoza came out with his writings, what do you do? What do you do as a religious Jew? So there's a few different approaches to this. One is the rejectionist. And who cares? So like Hasidism and Kabbalah, who cares? You think that Rizal cared about what Spinoza wrote, or the Alter Rebbe, or the Baal Shem Tov, or the Vilna Gaon? They didn't care. But there were those, like, for example, Moses Mendelssohn, the more enlightened world, that felt that if you're going to be honest about yourself, you're going to be honest about religion and Judaism, there needs to be a reconciliation. There needs to be an accounting of how do you answer the question that Spinoza brought up.
Right.
So there's two camps to this. There's the accommodationists that try to the best of their ability, try to show, even in Spinoza's writing, he never denied, or you can't deny that there's a God, even with his writing. I have a whole book there, Spinoza, Strauss, and Orthodoxy or something, But then there's a rejectionist, like who said, who cares? So Spinoza doesn't believe in God. That's going to affect me putting on tefillin every day.
Right.
But it's just a different.
It's
just in which world you're living in. If you're living in the world of academia, and people come up to you and say, "Well, you proclaim that you're an academic." Now, if you're a religious leader living in Latvia or Lithuania, no one's going to accuse you of that.
Yeah.
But if you're teaching in Harvard, and you're saying, "Oh, look, I'm open to all kind of ideas, and I'm a progressive thinker," So how do you answer to Spinoza?
Right.
Spinoza brings some good points.
Right.
So it's just a matter of where
Right.
The context.
The first thing, honestly, that turned me off to those guys is the fact that their followers call themselves the free thinkers.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't break your arm patting yourself on the back. I mean,
Yes.
it's like, was the super awesome, cool dudes not available as a name for yourselves?
No,
It's
that's
like,
true.
what-
Oh, we're the dummies. We're dummies.
It's just so cringe to think, oh, we're the free thing. The only people who are free thinkers would come around to our perspective. It's the only perspective that you could possibly come to. And it's just
true.
I'm embarrassed for them, honestly.
That's so funny.
Anyway, okay. Now
Yes.
all right, we're not going to do like last episode. We're not going to get to the topic.
Podcast, let's do something.
So I'll just start by saying that it was a pretty tough week in the Jewish world. There was a lot of terrible news out of Israel, and the Bibas family came back in coffins and were buried, and just a very difficult week. And one of the things that kept coming up for me was just how important Torah study is as a Jew. Like when you don't know what to do with yourself, when you have all these feelings. I shared a picture this morning of an old man like holding a Talmud, and his grandson wrote while he was watching the Bibas funeral, his grandfather walked away and grabbed his Gemara and sat down at his desk and started learning. And the grandson said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I didn't know what to do with all the pain, so I just started to learn Torah in their memory." And so I just want people to feel that they have access to this. You do not have to be a big Torah scholar. You don't have to read Hebrew. You don't have to know anything.
You don't have to be
orthodox to have access to Torah study. And it's so enriching and really helps, at least for me, and I think all three of us probably agree, that it just helps deal with the emotional roller coaster that we've been on, to take some of our ancient texts, read through it, learn something. So today we're going to focus on the Talmud and actually dive into a couple of stories in the Talmud, but really also get a sense of like, what is it, and hear from my father, who is a bit of a Talmud. Would you say you're a Talmud scholar? I'll say it.
No.
I'm certainly not. And I don't know, maybe Jay, are you a Talmud scholar? I'm not sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
sure.
I mean, that's my little brief intro, but I don't know if you have anything.
I mean, if you go to Twitter, there is tons of Talmud scholars on Twitter.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
they're like all over the place.
I know.
Yeah. No, but it's true. But I would venture to say that today there are more people studying Torah than ever in the history of the Jewish people.
Right.
I mean, we talk about the ancient great academies of Surah, Pompadisa, Nardoi, in Babylon, but it was a few thousand people.
Right.
Today in Israel alone, you have hundreds of thousands of people studying, many full-time, many part-time. Here in America, hundreds of thousands of people studying.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, like in the 20s, Rabbi Shapiro, where we were in his yeshiva in Chachmei Lublin, started the Daf Yomi, started to teach that, started to implement study of one page of Talmud a day. There's 2,711 pages, double-sided, of the Talmud. Takes about 7.5 years to go through the whole thing. The first time I think there were maybe 200 people at the conclusion of the 7.5. I'm just thinking. The last time I did it, they filled out MetLife Stadium.
Right.
70,000 people, and then they had hundreds of thousands of people around the world joining them who had studied 7.5. So for a small little community like the Jews, I mean, we're not a billion people. For a small little community, hundreds of thousands of people are learning Torah every day.
What's astonishing about that, and I want to make it clear, like I grew up in being educated in an Orthodox school. I learned Hebrew, reading, writing, and along with English, and yet the Talmud is not as accessible as I wish it was. It's very difficult. You can't just open up a book of the Talmud and start learning it. That's what I'm saying that because it's even more astonishing to me how many people have given themselves over to the practice of learning it. Because I'm a person, I cannot open a book of the Talmud and learn it on my own. I don't have the skills.
Today online,
you have with all
so
the
many
skills,
teachers,
but you have to have a lot of skills to do it.
So many teachers you have out there. I mean, there's one fellow. I don't follow him, but he gives a Daf Yomi shir, and he has about 2,000 people that join in. I mean, he's a great teacher. I mean, I've listened to a few of his classes. He's engaging. He's funny, and he gets it done. I mean, because you have to move. I mean,
Right.
because it could take you a page of the Talmud could take you 6 hours if you don't. But
Right.
Right.
I think even more and more secular Jews
Yes,
are embracing this
it's
study.
true. It's
I mean,
true.
I just read an article about someone who I don't know much about, Sharon Brous, who's
Yeah.
the rabbi of Ikar. No one would confuse her in being an Orthodox rabbi, but she claimed she fell in love with the Talmud,
Yeah,
with the rabbis of
She
the
wrote a
Talmud,
book, I think, about it.
and everything, and she loves the Talmud, studies the Talmud. So
Yeah.
if you want Im Tirtzu, if you want to, you
Right.
can.
Right.
And I'd be willing to bet also there are probably Christians that are
Yeah.
Sure.
studying Talmud. And
Yeah.
I mean, just because of the numbers, there might be more Christians studying it than
You
Jews,
never
potentially.
That's true. Let's start from the beginning. Like, let's do a brief introduction to what the Talmud is. I know we've done it in previous episodes, but let's remind everyone, what is the Talmud and sort of the structure of it and how it came to be. So give us that.
So the Talmud is a compilation of two major works, the Mishnah and the Gemara.
Okay.
The Mishnah was compiled in Israel by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh we call him, and his academy around the year 250. It is a compilation and an organization of all of the oral law that came down from Moses until that time. We're talking about a couple, a long time, a couple of thousand years, to there. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his academy, gathered together all the notes and pieces of paper and decisions and put it in an organized fashion. All of the oral tradition, all the laws. There are 63 volumes to the Mishnah, 63 volumes. 62 of them deal with Jewish law. One of them deals with ethics. We've talked about that, called Ethics of Our Sages. And in those 63 volumes, they're broken down into 6 orders, 6 different major categories, but they're written very concisely in paragraph form. There's about, I think, 2,200 Mishnahs, 500 and something chapters of it. And that was the Mishnah. So that was the organization and the putting together an orderly fashion of the oral tradition. The Gemara then later came on. And there's two Gemaras. I don't want to confuse many people, but we'll discuss mostly the Babylonian. There's also a Jerusalem Talmud, but we'll leave that aside for another day. But the Babylonian Talmud is when the Jews, actually the seat of scholarship, moved east from Israel to Babylon. They established huge yeshivas, huge centers of learning in Harda, Sura, Pompadisa, Machaza, other places. And they then discussed the Mishnah, the Baraisa. The Baraisa was all of those works that didn't make it into the Mishnah but were still available, and they tried to give an organized interpretation and a commentary on the Mishnah. And it also includes Agadat. It also includes stories of the sages, and includes, expositions on verses in the prophets, and talks about philosophy, astronomy, all different types of topics ended up in the Gemara. And the Gemara was finished probably in the year 500 in Babylon by a yeshiva, an academy led by Rav Ashi and Ravina. And that's what we call today, if you take the Mishnah and you take the Gemara and you put them together, that's the Talmud. Okay. So all of oral tradition is right there in those books.
Could you I made a joke earlier about how there's all these Talmud experts on Twitter, and they go and they just like cherry pick a quote about this thing or that thing and they say, oh, see, this is what the Talmud says about whatever stupid topic they're talking about. Could you talk a little bit about why that's not a legitimate way to read the Talmud? Just cherry picking quotes out of it.
In any discipline. I mean, if you picked any book, take a book of philosophy, and you took out 3 words, are you really getting the crux of what the matter is all about? Of course not. You wouldn't. Are there controversial statements in the Talmud? Absolutely. They were actually burnt. The Talmud was burnt in the 1290s in France. Of course, Jewish apostates claimed that the Talmud was anti-Christian, and they may have been some anti-Christian statements in there, because for a long time Christianity, certainly in the early part of the church, was not friendly to Judaism. So somebody lashed out or said something. It was included in the Talmud, but overall, overall, the Talmud is a systematic work. It's not seamless, because if you really study it, you'll see the joints that bind one piece to another piece to another piece. But you have to be an expert to be able to do that. So it's unfair to pick one word or one statement, because there's hundreds of people that are mentioned in the Talmud. So recording one person who thought this way, then you reflect on the entire scope of the Talmud, is unfair. It's like picking one American in 1776 who was democracy, who was a loyalist to England, and say, you see, not everybody wanted to go with England. There was millions of Americans, so that's unfair in of itself.
Is it fair to say that the way we practice religion today, as Orthodox Jews, is more Talmudic than biblical?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
So explain that for people.
Because biblically, it's very hard. If you went to the Bible itself and tried to follow the rules and regulations, you'd be lost.
Right.
Because there's no way to be able to know what they're talking about over there. Like tefillin. What tefillin, when tefillin, how tefillin, where, who's supposed to put on tefillin. So it's all based upon the oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly after the destruction of the temple, where a big part of Judaism was then taken away from us, sacrifices, the laws of purity and impurity, the temple itself, the services, the priesthood, all of that. So it came now what we would call rabbinical Judaism, which is, of course, an extension of biblical Judaism.
Correct.
They were loyalists to the Bible. They believed in the fundamentalist. They believed in the fundamental, divinity of the Bible, all the rules and regulations, except those that we can't do, that are not here, but God willing, when Mashiach comes back, we'll bring them back.
Right.
So it certainly has to. We live a life and we do things according to what the rabbis interpreted. And there's a whole study about this, of how they did this and why they did this and how you go about interpreting rules and regulations from the Bible itself. So it's quite a study.
So I want to just say one thing. I want people to understand how central Talmud study is in our in the Orthodox world, that my sons, and it's different for boys and girls. I did not, and this is changing. I'll do a little throat clearing. It's changing a little bit, but when I was growing up, certainly we did not learn Talmud in school. The girls did not. We studied other parts of Torah. We were very good with the prophets and the writings and Jewish history and Jewish law that pertained to the home. That's what we studied. The boys, from a very early age, starting in 3rd or 4th grade, they start building the skills to be able to become proficient in studying the Talmud.
Right.
And my sons today, who are in yeshiva, spend about 5 or 6 hours a day just immersed in Talmud study. That is the majority of their day. I think people have a perception that they spend most of their time studying the Torah itself, but that's actually not true. The most of the day is spent studying Talmud, and you have to have a lot of different skills. It's in Aramaic plus Hebrew, and you have to. It's complicated.
There's no punctuation.
There's no punctuation.
There's no vowels. There's no periods.
Yeah.
You have to know where a statement stops and where a statement. If it's a question, whether it's what the next topic then comes up. I mean, it's.
Right.
I still don't believe that anybody can read Hebrew without the vowels. I still think they're making it up.
I mean, just one caveat. I mean, just to say that the Talmud is not a book. It's not a legal book,
right?
Meaning that you're not going to be able to decipher what you could do and what you can do from the Talmud,
right?
Because it's still too nebulous.
Yeah.
Later on, they wrote codifiers came later on, like Maimonides, and actually codified the Talmud.
Yeah.
And we have what we call the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. That's the Code of Jewish Law. The Talmud is a work of study,
right?
To be able to
brilliant.
study.
It's actually brilliant.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant.
So the version of Talmud that is studied over the 7.5 year cycle. When was that completed?
The Talmud or the 7-year cycle?
The Talmud. Excuse me. The version of the Talmud.
The version of the Talmud.
Yeah.
So that was concluded about the year 500. around the year
that's what I thought.
500.
That's what I thought you said. Okay, all right.
So, okay, I just to make a finer point on something, when my son, because I have 4 sons, as you all know, and so I watch them go through their yeshiva education, and they get tested in various ways on the Talmud. One of the ways is every week, my son, who's in 10th grade, has a reading test where he simply has to read the words of the Gemara to his teacher to make sure, like my father said, that he knows what the sentence is, where it ends, where to pause, where it's a new idea. That's one thing they get tested on. The second thing they get tested on is translation. So they have to know all of the words that they're learning. And the third thing is the concept. And I think it's called Shaklavataria, which is like back and forth of what the rabbis are saying. And they get asked questions. And the boys, it's really fascinating. I mean, they really take apart a tough subject. I mean, it's hard. I think it's really hard. I'm very impressed with what they do and figure it out. So
I mean, so you said something there, Haile. I think it's important to emphasize that the Talmud is not just a really smart rabbi writing down the oral tradition.
Right.
Like that's not the structure of it. So could you, Rabbi, could you talk about the actual structure of the Talmud so people understand it's not just like a normal book?
No, it's not a normal book. It starts with the idea of reconciliation. So, for example, you'll take a Mishnah. A Mishnah was the starting point of any piece of Gemara we want to study. And it basically lays it down, and then it goes through every, like, you had in the academy, let's say you had about a number of different experts. So let's say, Jay, we appointed you that you're going to be, let's say, learning and studying about the laws of blessings. And which blessing goes to what and what blessing goes to do. And there were so many different arguments over the years. Like, what blessing would you make, like on a lemon? Now, you'd think that would be a simple thing. A lemon is a fruit, right? So you would make the blessing of Bora Priya Eitz, like any fruits, an apple, an orange. But no, because a lemon is not there to be eaten. You don't need a lemon, so it may be out of a different category. So there's differences of opinion. We would find all of the works that were discussed about this particular topic and give it to your group, and then your group then would try to reconcile this brisa, this piece of the Talmud that was not included in the Mishnah, and how it fits into the Mishnah. Sometimes it fits in easy. Sometimes it doesn't fit in that easy, but then you would try to reconcile it by saying, okay, I'm adjusting it. I found another piece that maybe I can answer it this way, and then another piece that would deny it. So it goes back and forth, and you're trying to reconcile all of these things. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but it could go on for a number of different pages where you can imagine your group, like everybody sitting around the table and just trying to fit all of these pieces like a puzzle together. And you'd say, well, and it's intergenerational, because you can quote someone who said something in the year 247 and then was shot down by someone who said something in the year 351. And you have all of these pieces of proofs in front of you. So, you have to be able to mix and match and go back and forth. And that's where the complication becomes. Does it match? Does it not match? Could you reconcile it? Could you not reconcile it? Could one argue on the other? Who said it? What said it? When did he say,
And then there could be a story thrown in about a lemon that fell off a tree and a rabbi was walking.
We call this the meandering Talmud.
Yes.
Because from that, talking about a lemon.
Yes.
So what is a lemon normally used for? To squirt into tea.
Right.
Okay, so now what do you do with the tea? The tea now has a lemon in it.
Right.
What blessing? Oh, now we're talking about tea.
Yeah.
So, how do you make tea hot water? Oh, hot water. What do you do on Shabbos?
Right.
Okay, so
Can
from
you
the blessing.
A lemon on
so
Shabbos?
Go from a lemon, now you went to Shabbos. Oh, so what about cooking on Shabbos? If you can squeeze a lemon, can you squeeze a strawberry? Because a lemon is normally squeezed in. So we call this the meandering Talmud. It goes from topic to topic to topic. And then it's back. They tell the story of this Gentile that came to the rabbi and said, Rabbi, I want you to teach me the Talmud, but quickly. I don't want to spend years. He says, okay, no problem. I'll teach you the Talmud very quickly. He says, here, 2 thieves are coming down a chimney. One thief has a dirty face. One thief has a clean face. Who washes his face? The Gentile says, of course, it's the guy with the dirty face. He says, you see, you'll never be a Talmud scholar. Why? He says, think about it. 2 guys come down. The guy with the dirty face looks at the other guy and sees what? A clean face. The guy with the clean face looks at the other guy and sees a dirty face. So who's going to wash his face? The guy with the clean face, you'll never get it. Okay, so the Gentile says, now I get it. Now he says, now you get it. No, you still don't get it. Why?
Yeah.
Because how can two people come down the same chimney and one have a clean face and one have a dirty face? So every single proposition has to be challenged.
Right.
I mean, just because you're saying two people came down a chimney, how's that possible? So it reminds me of the story of Rabbi in the academy. There's a mitzvah called a Shavas Aveda. And then maybe we'll get to the Talmud itself today. But there's a mitzvah called a Shavas Aveda, of returning a lost object. I mean, that's a mitzvah from the Bible. The Bible says if you find something, you have to return it. So if you find something in the public domain and it says Chayalei Safran on it, then it's not okay. Chayalei Safran gets it. What if it doesn't have any distinguishing marks? So there's a whole discussion back and forth of what, when, how, where. Fine. Birds fall into a different category because birds fly. You find a bird in the public domain, there's no way to tell where it's from. But what if you found a dove right near a dove cote?
What's
a dove cote is a little home for doves.
Oh.
It's a little house
A nest.
that they nest.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had a nest, and then right under the tree you had a dove. So most probably you would say that this dove belongs to the guy who owns the dove cote on top. But how far? What if it's 10 cubits? Nah, still. 20 cubits? Yeah, still. 40? Yeah. They finally, after a whole day of arguing back and forth of how much, they've decided 50 cubits. That's going to be, if you find a dove within 50 cubits of a dove cote, it belongs to the owner of the dove cote. Outside of 50 cubits, it's yours because it flew from somewhere else. Okay. They want a break for lunch. This guy raises his hand. Yes, Rabbi Yirmiyah? What if it happens to be in the 50-yard line? Meaning half of it is in the 50 and half of it is outside the 50. What do you do then? They kick them out. So you can't take anything for granted in the Talmud because it'll hit you sideways just when you thought that you have everything sort of wrapped up with a nice little bow on top. Someone is going to come in and say, and then you ask, like, why are these people saying it this way? Why would someone say a blessing for the lemon is this and a blessing for lemon for that? The reasoning. Give me the reasoning. I want to know the reasoning for why you say this.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's
so in case anybody's wondering why there's so many Jewish lawyers and scientists,
no question.
This is the reason.
I'm teaching now a class on decoding the Talmud. It's our JLI class. And after teaching the class on the Mishnah and then the Baraisa and trying to reconcile one Mishnah with one Baraisa and then another Baraisa, and then a guy wrote me a note. A guy wrote me an email. Rabbi, I enjoy your class very much, but I want to ask you a question. And I wanted to let you think about it before I asked it in class. The question is, so what?
Oh.
So what? I mean, we were arguing whether a guy who shouldn't eat any food before eating matzah on the eve of Passover from 3:00 or 3:30 or maybe Shabbos also. And it was very complicated going back and forth. So he just asked me, so what? I mean,
who cares?
Like what? What does it matter if the guy didn't eat? So I came to class and he was sitting there and I said, you want to expand on your two-word question? And then he said, what's the purpose of all of this? And then I tried to explain that, every act in Judaism is important, and the rabbis felt that, you want to do something, you want to do it with complete devotion and, the best way you could possibly do intention, so that's what it takes. But a lot of people ask that about the Talmud, that it's too... It gets involved in too many minutia. I mean, you could stand on like this issue of 50 yards to an average person on the outside sitting in and listening to this. You think you're absurd.
Yeah,
you're nuts. I mean,
but the way of thinking that it forces the students to do is something that
because they keep challenging
incredible.
you. Come up with
yeah. Sometimes I listen to my boys talk about it. They'll laugh and, they'll say the most absurd or crazy line of thinking that they came across in the Gemara. And I just appreciate that they have that opportunity to delve in and understand and learn in that way. And, the oral arguments that they have to make. I mean, it's very helpful in thinking and logic.
That's one part of the Talmud is that's the legalistic part.
Yeah.
The Agadata, that's the teachings, the moral and ethical teachings.
Right.
They believed a lot in, in supernaturalism.
Right.
I mean, they were totally immersed in this idea of supernaturalism. So to them, a fantastic story of, of whatever it should be, it was real. I mean, Reb Pinchas ben Yair's donkey could answer all Talmudic questions. I mean,
Right.
I mean, he was such a holy man, so they bought that. I mean, they believed that. So that's interesting in and of itself, and that's a lot of people have a problem with, because you're going to learn Talmud, and then all of a sudden it's going to veer off into a story, and the story was where they saw this giant bird that had one foot on this side of the Jordan,
Right.
and another foot on that side of the Jordan, and you're going to go, I mean, this is the greatness of the Talmud, but they really, really, truly believed in a spiritual world, and that manifested itself in this physical world, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If we get to it,
yes, let's get to it, because I really wanted to be specific and give everyone an opportunity.
Let's do one.
Yeah, we'll do. Okay. Well, I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to hear how a piece of the Talmud gets, from a story to the way of thinking. And there's so much of who we are as a Jewish people today that we take for granted, but it comes from somewhere, right? The way we look at the world and the ideas that we have.
Well, this story that we're going to dealing with today is not really one of those back and forth discussions.
Right.
It's going to start with a disagreement.
It starts with it, yeah.
It starts with a disagreement between rabbis, but the purpose of reading this is really more humanistic, I would say, is the lessons we learn out from this, because this comes from a tractate called Baba Metzia, one of the main tractates that deals with all damages and property values, and partnerships. It's just all legal things that have to do with it. In the middle of it, it talks about, how you have to, talk about and respect each other. I mean, you don't want to wrong anybody. I mean, that's really the purpose of this story, of how you have to be very careful, even in terms of disagreement. There's a certain amount of respect that needs to be done. This story goes beyond. And that's why the story is in here in the Talmud, not because it has anything to do with the issue at hand, because, we're talking about damages and we're talking about all different other things, here in Baba Metzia. So,
well, just say, for those who want to look it up, and we'll link it, but we're talking about Baba Metzia 59b, A and B, but it's the Oven of Akhnai. So it's
okay.
Okay, so
what are we dealing with over here? We're dealing with an issue of something becomes impure. How does something become impure? A dead carcass touches it, or a rat falls into it, whatever it is. Someone who's impure touches it.
These are vessels.
These are vessels. Now, the only time that a vessel can become impure if it is man-made, meaning if it's just a natural stone, nothing happens to it. It can never become impure because it didn't have any human interaction with it.
Okay.
So that's
something like clay
or this, nothing does not become impure.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't become impure. Now, ovens in the olden days were made from earthenware. Man put it together, he burnt it, he made it. So an oven could definitely become impure. Anything touches it, falls into it, whatever it is, it becomes impure. This was a very different type of an oven. What happened was someone took an oven and cut it into pieces.
Right.
Okay? If someone cut sections for an oven, means he didn't make the oven, but he cut it into sections. And what he did is he put sand between each section to cement them together. And then the oven came into contact with something impure. Okay? So what he did was he never really made an oven per se by burning it and then cementing it. He just kept it together with this sand, which sand is not a man-made thing. So he never really did anything into it, but it did have the look of an oven, and it was an oven. So there was a difference of opinion. That's why it's called Akhnai, because Akhnai means snake, and the oven kind of looked like a snake because of the cement that was running around this. Or the other reason why they called it an Akhnai is because the rabbis, it's going to ask over here, why is it called the snake? Is that the discussion was like a coiled snake. And it was very, very tense, like a coiled snake. And then they decided. So Rabbi Eliezer says it's tahor. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, this can never become impure because it's not, he would not consider this man-made.
Okay.
This is not a man-made oven, so it's tahor. The rabbis disagreed with him. It's pure. Right. The rabbis disagreed. They said, no, there is still man-made. It's still an oven, and it does have the properties of impurity. Okay? So that this is one of thousands and thousands of disagreements. Now, normally what would happen is that we would go on. Next topic. Okay, either would reconcile or not. No. So now what happened? So that day, it says that day Rabbi Eliezer advanced all of the arguments in the world to defend his lenient ruling. He told them all different. Now, this Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus was a brilliant scholar. So you're not talking about like Johnny come lately. He was one of the major authors of the Mishnah. V'loi kiblu. The sages did not accept his arguments. So even he tried whichever one way to win them over, they would not accept his arguments. Okay? So he said, so then he decided, you know what? He's going to bring in some supernatural events. And he said, if the law is like me, then let this carob tree be uprooted from its place and move 100 cubits. Okay? Some say it was 400 cubits. So the rabbi said, nah, you don't bring any proof from a carob tree.
But it did. It happened.
It happened.
In the story, it happened.
It happened.
Right.
Then he said, if the law is like me, let the water canal flow backwards. And it did. The rabbi says, you cannot bring a proof from a water canal. Then he kept saying like this, if the law is like me, let the walls of the academy prove it. And the walls began to lean in and began to fall. So Rabbi Yeshua, one of his colleagues, screamed at the wall and said, what is your business here? We're talking about words of Jewish law. What's your business? So the wall stopped from leaning in. Then he decided, okay. He said, if a law is like me, let heaven prove it. And a heavenly echo went out and proclaimed that the ruling is like Rabbi Eliezer. That's it.
Okay, so basically you're saying
the heavenly voice came out, they all heard it, and they said the law is which all the law follows in what argument have with Rabbi Eliezer, the law is like him.
So according to where we are so far in the story, based on the supernatural responses and based on the last part, which is the heavenly voice, they all agree that Rabbi Eliezer is correct.
Correct.
And that the rabbis are wrong.
Correct.
Because the rabbis are saying that the vessel could become impure. Rabbi Eliezer is saying it is pure, and God himself, to some degree,
a heavenly voice,
something from God is agreeing with Rabbi Eliezer.
Stands up Rabbi Yeshua, one of his opponents, and says, "Loi b'shamayim hi." The Torah is not in heaven. Well, what do we care what heaven says? The Torah, Moses says clearly in the book of Deuteronomy that it's not in heaven. You don't have to go up to heaven to receive it. It's down here. It has to be decided by people. It cannot be decided by a heavenly echo. Okay?
And that's an astonishing statement from a rabbi. I mean, it's an astonishing thing to say. Okay. I mean, okay, continue.
Okay. So Rabbi Yeshua goes on to say, this is opponent, we don't pay attention to a heavenly echo because it says already in the Torah says, Achri Rabbim Lahatos. You have to follow the majority opinion. That's that if there's an argument, you follow the majority opinion. And since the majority of the sages dispute, his position is rejected in practice. I mean, it's simple. You can't come from heaven and deny something that's already been said in the Torah. If you heard a heavenly voice say, don't keep Shabbos, you would reject it because the Torah says you have to keep Shabbos.
Wow.
Okay? Years later, Reb Nosson met Elijah, Elijah the prophet, and the story goes on, and says, what was God doing during this moment? When Rabbi Yeshua said, we reject the heavenly echo. I mean, God said, hey, it's pure. And Rabbi Yeshua says, we don't care because we decided down here, human beings, that it's impure. So what was God doing? He wanted to ask Elijah, what was God doing? And he said, he was laughing. God was laughing and saying, my children have prevailed over me. My children have prevailed over me. Meaning that he agreed with them. Right. I mean, it's an incredible story to think about this, that God himself was sitting up in heaven and saying, you know what, the people are right. Rabbi Yeshua and his colleagues are right.
I mean, there's so many questions I have about this story because...
Let's just finish the story quickly and then we'll get into it. We'll get into this. What happened is, now that Rabbi Eliezer took this position of leniency, the rabbis then went out because of the severity of this issue, and they took all of his rulings about purity and impurity and made them impure.
Right.
So whenever you had a question about purity and impurity, and Rabbi Eliezer said it's pure, they made it impure. and then they knocked him out.
Right.
They excommunicated him because they just went in because they voted and excommunicated him, and someone said, "Who's going to go see him? Who's going to go tell him?" Rabbi Akiva said, "I'll go because he'll know it's nothing personal." He went with black, and he said, "You have been rejected." And then from that day on, he was on the outs. And Rabbi Gamliel, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, was his brother-in-law. Rabbi Eliezer was married to Rabbi Gamliel's sister, and she would never let him say the prayers of supplication because she knew that if her husband said the prayers of supplication, harm would come to her brother. Because you don't do this. What do you mean you put him in excommunication? Just because you disagree with him, you're excommunicating him? Anyways, that went on for a long time until one day, of course, something happened, and he did say the supplication, and word came that Rabbi Gamliel passed away. That's the end of the story.
He was punished for excommunicating
him, and that's the end of the story.
Right.
So the oven itself is not so much it's not so much the main part of it, even though it's an important part of purity and impurity.
Yeah.
But it's how you deal with each other. I mean, like, remember we talked about in the beginning that why is this in here is because even after everything is said and done, you have to show respect to your opponent.
Right.
And they didn't.
It's interesting that that's the thing that you take away from it, because I look at this story as a much more theological story of the rabbis positioning themselves in a way that you would think could be considered heretical, right? Because they're making a case here in the story that their opinion on a legal matter in Jewish law is more important than God's opinion. And I know it's maybe a small line and it's not like the gist of the story, but isn't that like a radical move for the group of rabbis to make that case?
To them, it was very simple. It wasn't even radical to them, because to them, you cannot, if it comes to Jewish legal issues, there's a system. The system has worked since the day Moses walked down from the mountain. This is not arbitrary. We're not sitting over here arbitrarily coming to a conclusion because we don't like Rabbi Eliezer. We have developed a system of how to adjudicate certain questions within Judaism. These things were given to us by God through Moses. It's not that we made it up ourselves.
Right.
The fact that Achi Rabim Lahato is that you have to follow the majority, and Loi Bashamayim he is not a. It's not. I understand that secular Jews are going to take this to say, you see, look, it's much more important to be humanistic than it is to follow God's rule. That's not the story here.
Right.
That's not that. I reject that 100%. I've heard that said many times. You see, like, it's not so important to follow God's rules because they didn't follow God's rules. They were exactly following God's rules.
Right.
They were following God's rules. And God did this now, I believe, to emphasize once again that here, if you follow the system of halacha, not that you come up with your own halacha. It's easy to say pure and impure. No, that's not what it is. If you follow the system that Moses gave to us, that there's a way, the hermeneutical rules,
there's
this
precedent.
is how you do it, there's precedent, there's and you're still 100% loyal to the words of the Torah. You're not rejecting the words of the Torah. If someone came along and said, well, you know what, there's no Shabbos, not whether you can heat something up on Shabbos, not heating up on that, you could disagree with back and forth. But if someone just literally rips out the mitzvah of Shabbos, there's no Shabbos from the Torah. Are we going to accept? Are we going to accept his? No, of course not.
Right.
So here, the key is always remember that they were loyalist to a system that kept them going. They did not veer out of the system.
Right.
Now, disagreeing is not a problem, because they allow it. When Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel disagreed, and Rabbi disagreed. They all disagreed with each other because that's part of how you come to some kind of a halachic decision. But it's all within this framework of halacha, not outside of halacha.
Right.
And
of
then
Jewish
once
law.
you realize that, then you say, you know what? God threw this at them to see what's going to be their response. Let's see. And the real ruling is that the oven is impure, because that's what the rabbis had decided. So I think from that vantage point, it's a little different than many people view it. That's saying, hey, you know what? Look, they rejected God. God said A, and they said B. And they see it's not important what God says. So, why would we have
That's
to do
not
anything?
the point. Right.
That's not the point. Because Baskal, heavenly voices were, look how easy it was for him to do this.
Right.
So heavenly voices came out, I'm sure not every day, but from time to time. And
That's like when a heavenly voice comes out and tells me I should go to Nordstrom's right
yes,
now.
exactly.
It happens a lot.
But I think the point of the story
I think-
is here. Why it's included. I'm sorry, Jay. I'll give you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why it's included in here is because if you looked at the previous pages, they were talking about how that you have to deal with people and respect people and not bring harm to people.
Right. Okay.
I think from the standpoint of adjudicating God's law too, I think it relates to the last couple of parshas that we've read between Yitro and Mishpatim, because, and you can tell me this is me attempting some Talmudic debate, so I'm sure I'm missing something here, but God commanded Moses to be a judge, and then Moses made multiple judges. Correct. And then in Mishpatim, he tells the Israelites the laws, but ultimately it's for the Israelites to adjudicate the laws. That's why he set up the court system and why he made judges. And so it seems like that God never also have certain cases like we talked about in the last episode with with orphans and widows. For the vast majority of these circumstances, it was always God's intent to have people adjudicate his laws on earth, not for him to adjudicate everything.
Absolutely. There's no question about that, because you see the whole reason of setting up a court system. And then God says in Deuteronomy that, you know what, when issues will come before you, don't pray to God. I mean, what you need to do is to go to the Kohen or to the Rabbi or to Sanhedrin and ask the question, and they will tell you what to do. And what they say is right or wrong, left, right, up, down. They will decide. Loi b'shamayim it is left up to them, but with the one caveat that they need to stay loyal. I can't emphasize that enough, because if you could have a corrupt court, it doesn't work. Because, I mean, if you adjudicate a case that's against the Torah, that's not Torah value. That's a sin, and then you don't have to listen. And even when the rabbis, like let's say in the case of a Bezdin, you have three rabbis, two antagonists come in, and they rule in favor of Mr. A. Mr. B has a right to say, Heicha Dantoni, I want to see your reasoning and where you have in precedent that I am wrong. It's not only because you decided, you know what, his arguments sound better. No, I want to see where you in precedent had this case and why you ruled against me. He has a right to do that. And if they can't prove that, forget about it. No, they need to be able to prove that. So to be a judge was a very, very difficult position. You had to be well versed in the entire Talmud, and all of the precedent, and the Torah, and all the precedent before that. So
it's interesting. I remember this is years and years ago, you were on a panel with different denomination rabbis, like Reform, Conservative, and somebody asked a question about Jewish law, and one of the rabbis, I think it was the Reform rabbi, said, we take our leniencies on Jewish law from the Talmud, and he gives an example of Rabbi Yossi, who ate chicken, and was it Rabbi Yossi? I don't want to misquote. Who ate chicken with dairy, right? And that's definitely not the opinion of all the rest of the rabbis. And we're very strict today about the laws of kosher. You do not eat chicken. Chicken is considered meat, and we don't eat chicken with dairy. And your answer was so good. I still remember. This is years ago, and you said, yeah, but Rabbi Yossi was keeping 613 commandments when he made that decision. He didn't just stop eating, he didn't just consider chicken as pariv out of the blue. Like, he kept every single law and came to an understanding of why that made sense. So it's similar to what you're saying. Like, you can't just say... right? Did I
totally
get that correctly?
You hit it perfectly. He kept all of the laws,
right?
Including everything else in the Torah,
right?
But in this particular disagreement, which hadn't yet been adjudicated, he ruled one way and they ruled another way.
Right?
Okay, fine. That's good. So if you're in the level of Rabbi Yossi, and I would agree with you, Rabbi, if I would be there, that you do all 612 mitzvahs and keep everything else, and then decide that chicken is this, fine, all right. Then you may have
keep none of the mitzvahs.
Like Jay brought up before about nitpicking. You pick. Oh, look at this guy. You know what? He only prayed. There were rabbis that only prayed once every 30 days.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Why did they pray once every 30 days? Because they studied all day.
Oh.
So Terasa Yomnase, their livelihood was Torah study, and that took precedent over prayer. Today you don't have that. You don't have those
Right.
kind of people.
Right.
But back in Talmudic times, there were people of Shimon Bar Yochai, others, that Terasa Yomnase, your entire existence was studying. So therefore you prayed for one every 30 days.
Wow.
You see, look, I'm going to start praying one every 30
Right.
days, just
Right.
like he did. No. No. If you told me that you study 20 hours a day and and you practice everything else, they put on tefillin, they kept kosher, they did
Shoot.
this, then you could tell
I was
me
starting
that.
to feel better about myself since I don't pray that often. I was like, oh, me and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai don't
Maybe
pray.
you should start thinking about praying. That's
I have this one little piece that I want to read because this
Please.
is right before the story. This comes from the Mishnah right before the Oven of Akhnai, and I think it lends itself to this conversation because it says, and I'm quoting here from the Mishnah, it says, just as there can be wrongdoing in buying and selling, so can there be wrong done by words. Thus, one must not ask another, what is the price of this article if he has no intention of buying it? You can't walk into a store if you know you're not going to buy something, but you're just making the store owner busy and asking, you're not allowed to do it. And then it continues. If a person is a Baal Tshuva, somebody who comes back, returns a repentant, one must not say to him, remember your former deeds. If he was a son of a proselyte, one must not taunt him, remember the deeds of your ancestors, because it is written, thou shalt neither wrong a stranger nor oppress him. So the point you were making about the way we speak to each other, the things that you're allowed to say to each other, it really does make a difference. And the rabbis in the Talmud, I think, are identifying specific categories of that. Somebody who, you don't want to make fun of a convert, for example, and say, "Oh, your grandparents were this," or somebody.
Look at you.
Yeah, look at you, or look at this.
2 years ago, you wanted you were sitting in church, and now you want mafter yoina.
We'll have to stop making fun of Jay because he's becoming more religious. So.
No.
Well, at least for that,
we'll stop.
What you mentioned about not going into a store, and someone asked a question. One asked me a question. What about this? What about now? A lot of people buy on Amazon.
Yeah.
Could you go into a store like Barnes and Nobles and just snoop around and ask questions, knowing full well that you're not going to buy there? Are you allowed to do that? According to the Mishnah, you're not supposed to do that.
No.
The answer is yes.
Right.
Because I'll tell you why. Because the store owner still wants people to come in.
Right.
Even if he knows that you're not going to buy there, he still would like you to come in because two things happens. Number one, you may change your mind. Right. You may say, if I want the book now, I'll buy it.
Right.
Number two, when people see there's a lot of action in the store, so you're still out to do that.
It's funny.
But
it's interesting because that little piece is something that was so ingrained in us growing up. I can't tell you how many times we were taught that little tiny behavior. Don't walk into a store and ask and bother them. And so I was trained from a young age. If I walk into a store, I always say immediately, I'm just looking. Like that's how we were trained to behave when we walk. I don't know, maybe it's more for women, but like when we walk into a clothing store, we walk into I'm just looking, because you don't want the person to think that you're going to buy and then you feel bad and you're doing something wrong. So it
doesn't pertain to men. For two reasons. Number one, men never go shopping. That's first of all. Number two, if you by some chance find a man in a store, he's buying. Okay, he's not going back on Amazon and looking 12 places. That pair of pants, does it fit? Does it make my tuchus look big? No, it doesn't. Good. How much is it? Fine. Here's my credit card.
Oh my God.
So there's no chance that you're going to find a man. I'm only looking. No man is only looking. There's no such thing.
I'm laughing because I don't even like shopping. But yesterday on my way home from I don't like shopping. Yesterday on my way home from work, I needed to relax for a few minutes. So I went to Nordstrom's rack and I just walked around and it was very relaxing.
I'm sorry. Anybody who says I need to relax and they relax by going shopping and they say I don't like shopping. I mean, that is.
Oh my God. I didn't buy anything.
That's a non sequitur.
I didn't even buy anything.
There you
just
go.
Walked around the store and I looked.
That's a whole different discussion for another day.
Anyway, any final thoughts? Anything you want to add or?
No, I think it was great. We're gonna have a guest on in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Who has done Daf Yomi and we'll be able to talk about that whole thing and his experiences with that. So I think that'll be an interesting follow on to this conversation. But I think it was a great introduction.
I encourage everyone, if you want to study, go on to go online and just look introductory study of Talmud. I'm sure there's many classes that you could join. Many of them are free. Some you may have to pay for, but it's well worth it. Believe me, this is really, I would say, more than just a study. I think this is like a preparation for retirement, because you're going to have to do something when you retire. And what are you going to do? I mean, are you a golfer? Are you a hunter? Are you going to jump out of planes? If you get into Talmud study, every city has a group of people that you can immediately attach yourself to, and you have at least something to do during the day. So this is something you'd want to get into.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah.
And that was
Awesome.
good advice.
Oh no, here comes Alan Sherman.
Oh,
my father.
That was great. That was a good overview. I think people have a better idea of what the Talmud is now, and not just this this thing that they see on social media that some jerk
that's
take
right.
out of context.
I know we never do this, but if you want to know more, you can go to my YouTube page.
Yeah, push
Rabbi
it.
Abba
Yeah.
Perlmutter.
Oh yeah,
I'm giving this
we'll link to
class,
it.
Decoding the Talmud.
And
We've
Yes.
done 4 classes. You'll be able to check out those classes, and
Yeah, we should.
you do that.
Perfect.
It's Rabbi Abba Perlmutter on YouTube.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely, for
Okay.
sure. Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you later.